A massive storm hit us a couple of weeks ago. It caused some serious damage. Thankfully, the renovations are due to be completed next month, right on time to welcome our guests.
Are you throwing a celebration of some sort?
More like a weekend retreat. I hold one on the island every year.
Lovely. Is there an occasion?
Just a reunion with friends and business associates who, like me, appreciate the privacy Isla Esperanza offers.
Who are you expecting?
Famous celebrities and scientists, to mention a few.
Wow. Sounds like a fancy dinner party.
Oh no, nothing that extravagant.
I'll make sure I'm up to speed with my duties by then. Can't have you looking shabby in front of the guests, after all. Oh my. Some of the most influential people of the year will be visiting us. How exciting. Do you mind if I ask you? How did you know Dr. Cat? I've been a big fan since her show aired last year.
Well, Catherine and I met at the Planetary Conference a couple of years ago. As a fan of her theories, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to say hello when I saw she was attending the event.
Is she as lovely in real life as she is on TV?
To my surprise, yes. Catherine is friendly and humble. Traits that are not often seen in many celebrities. We had a lovely chat, too. But I was saddened to hear about the situation with her project.
Oh my. Was everything all right?
Catherine had been struggling to get funding for her solar sail design. All her theories were greeted with derision and disbelief by the scientific community.
Really? It's hard to believe Dr. Cat went through something like that. I'd always presumed she carried substantial weight within scientific circles.
That wasn't the case back then. Catherine had yet to prove her theories right. I recognized the immense potential in her work and felt compelled to offer my financial support. She politely refused. It wasn't funding Catherine was after, but recognition from her peers, which she eventually earned on her own merit. Catherine reminded me a lot of myself back then. Maybe that's the reason we're such good friends now.
I can't wait to meet her in person. She really sounds like my sort of gal.
I'm sure Catherine will be very fond of you too, Georgiana.
How did you end up meeting Miss Lim? Her novels were my only escape from the reality of my previous job.
You certainly weren't alone. It's a well-known fact that Janet's readers frequently get totally immersed in her worlds. But when I met her back at Stanford, she was yet to become the best-selling author she is today. At the time, I was researching alchemy practices during the Middle Ages and needed a mentor. My coordinator recommended Janet as the best expert on medieval studies on the campus.
I guess her knowledge ended up being used in more than just her novels.
Absolutely. Janet was a magnificent researcher and a patient mentor. We had a lot in common. I vividly remember the long hours we spent talking in the university cafe.
Birds of a feather flock together, don't they?
Indeed they do. Meeting up with Janet at the cafe turned into a tradition for us. As a matter of fact, in that same cafe, I got to read the manuscript for Janet's first novel.
The Magician of the Constant. You're very lucky, Mr. Navarro.
I guess I am. To this day, Janet still sends me all her manuscripts to review.
Oh my. Any chance you could let me take a look at them too?
I'd be happy to show them to you, but not without Janet's approval. I can introduce you to her next month. We'll talk about it then.
Marvelous. I look forward to the party. But I'm a bit worried, Mr. Navarro. Won't your guests mind someone like me cleaning their rooms?
Besides, you've already paid your debts to society.
Paid in full, plus extra, if you ask me.
I imagine your time spent locked away was a harsh experience.
Terrible. Holloway Prison is no joke. One of the most horrendous places I've ever been in.
I heard so many horrible things about that penitentiary.
Regardless of what you've heard, I can assure you, the reality is far grimmer. Fights among inmates were commonplace. The guards didn't just turn a blind eye, they actively incited these scuffles. And if you decided not to play along with their games, you'd get beaten by the guards instead.
No one can be reformed in an environment like that.
A place like Holloway doesn't try to rehabilitate anyone. It only makes matters worse. Take me as an example. My involvement in aimless brawls only served to extend my incarceration. Being stuck in that hellhole for too long would make anyone lose their mind.
What kept you sane during those turbulent years?
Well, I had moral support. Who'd think that such a small gesture could have so great an effect? A person whom I thought I'd never see again regularly visited me. It was his advice that got me out, avoiding fights and staying on my best behavior.
It got you released, and that's all that matters.
Yes, in a free life that I forgot how to live. It took me years to get myself sorted. And when things finally started looking up, I got pulled back into that rotten underworld by Nigel Warren. That was the most wicked time I have ever experienced. The mark prison left on me is something that I'll never forget.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Don't get me wrong, Mr. Navarro. I deserved that punishment. I just hoped for a fresh start after prison, but it wasn't that simple. People tend to dwell on the past.
It's irrational how society can often be less forgiving than the law itself.
Oh, people didn't care if I'd already paid for my wrongdoings. The judgment never stopped. No one would give me a job. Yet everyone called me a layabout for not working. A paradox, if you ask me. It was only thanks to my sister that I managed to get a housekeeping position at the Anglican boarding college. But even that didn't last long.
Because of him, right?
Yes, Nigel Warren. That scoundrel blackmailed me into resigning and going to work for him instead.
Such a rotten individual. I can't forgive him for what he did to you and my employees.
So many have suffered at the hands of that monster.
Warren had a hand in schemes to extort huge corporations around the country. My company didn't elude his greedy fingers either. He demanded a hefty sum for security fees to ensure the safety of my shipments.
And did you give in to his offer?
Of course not. I'd already tarnished my company's legacy enough by striking shady business deals in the past. Never again. But refusing Nigel Warren came with a price. A price not worth paying. At least not with the lives of my employees.
It's the way he operates. I've seen him extort people hundreds of times. In the end, all local businesses give in to Nigel's demands. He can be really persuasive. I remember there was an owner of a pizza place who dared to cross him. The poor man's body was found shoved inside his own oven. It wasn't a pretty sight, I'll tell you that much.
I'm fully aware of what Warren is capable of. I got a bitter taste of it when he orchestrated the murder of my staff. Last month, I suffered the consequences of my choices. When
Nigel is involved, cases don't stay open for long. The police have been in his pocket for years.
Since no one would lift a finger against him, I decided to bring Warren to justice on my own. I had to hit him where it hurt most. His international money laundering network.
Weren't you worried that Nigel might retaliate?
I admit, I was concerned for the safety of the rest of my employees. But I'd never have forgiven myself for letting Rob's and David's murders go unpunished.
So, you took the law into your own hands? Was that part of his larger schemes?
Yes. Warren managed the offshore accounts of many organized crime top dogs. My team and I uncovered most of the trail of their dirty money. There was enough evidence to put Warren's entire network in jeopardy.
So, what did you do with it?
I confronted the businessmen Warren was laundering money for and threatened to expose their operations.
The fact that you're still breathing is nothing short of astonishing, Mr. Navarro. Are you suggesting those people would have gone after Nigel's head if he'd refused?
That would have been the most logical outcome. Warren ran their entire money laundering network. He was their biggest liability. If he talked, it would be more than just their operation that would go down.
In your shoes, I would have used your leverage to exterminate that parasite.
It was never my intention to increase the body count, Georgiana. I wanted justice, not revenge. Besides, keeping my findings secret was the only safeguard I had.
So it was all a bluff?
A subterfuge to force Warren to confess.
Sounds like you extorted Nigel's clients. There's no doubt he deserved it. But I would never have expected that from a respectable citizen like you.
I did what was necessary to put that murderer behind bars.
So, has Nigel confessed to murdering your drivers?
He did, last night, while you were on the plane.
I wish they had. Dad even changed his surname to avoid being associated with his relatives. But they kept trying to pull him back into their nest of vipers. Throughout my childhood, Nigel and the others repeatedly showed up at our doorstep. They used to offer my dad money and expensive gifts, expecting to win him over. He was afraid that they'd sweep his little girls into that sordid world. Dad wouldn't let Nigel, or anyone else for that matter, come within an inch of my sisters and me.
It's only natural for a father to protect his children.
His fear, however, slowly turned into paranoia. Dad started believing that every single one of our neighbors was a spy sent by the family. He became very violent toward anyone who dared come too close to us.
And did his aggression extend to your family?
No, never. But my father was unraveling. We were all petrified, watching him turn into something we didn't recognize. One evening, he simply lost control, and our neighbor bore the brunt of his outburst. Dad put the man in a wheelchair, just because he thought that poor soul was an enforcer sent by his relatives. I honestly don't know what got into him. The booze, the paranoia? God, what a mess he was. It pains me to say it, but he deserved all the prison time he got. Their visits used to trigger old memories. Memories of the man he used to be. A man he hated. Whatever my father had done in the past, haunted him. It resurfaced each time his relatives showed up. He never talked about it. Instead, he chose the comfort of a pub and downed pints to drown his sorrows. It sent shivers down my spine when he stumbled in through the door each night, shouting out loud.
I hope he wasn't abusive.
My father was a mess, but he never laid a finger on his family. He was punishing himself for his past actions, not us. Although that caused his drinking to spiral out of control.
Did Robert ever overcome his issues?
Only years later, after being sent to prison. Unfortunately, he had to get locked away to sober up. Quite sad, if you ask me.
How old were you when your father wound up in jail?
I was only 9, but my sisters, Clemency and Mildred, were even younger.
That all sounds horrible, Georgiana. Do you think any of it has affected how your life has turned out?
To a certain degree, yes, but the wrong decisions I made were mine alone. I turned to pickpocketing at a very young age. After Dad ended up in prison, our household income quickly evaporated. My mum's low wage couldn't keep up with the bills. So my sisters and I had to help her put food on the table.
Such responsibility should never fall on children's shoulders.
Yet it did. We became street beggars.
Was your mother aware of this?
She was the one who sent us to beg in the first place. That witch couldn't tolerate a crook in the family, but apparently exploiting her own children was no big deal. As long as we were living honest lives, she used to say.
Being manipulated by your own mother couldn't have been easy on any of you.
We hated begging, but we hated coming back home empty-handed even more. Mum wouldn't allow my sisters and me inside the house if we had no money on us. That leech made us sleep outside. During the harshest nights, we prayed that someone would spare us even a single penny. However, to most people, we were simply a nuisance they'd rather ignore.
Shame on them.
All I wanted back then was to have a warm bed and a full belly. We all did. In a situation like that, it's a matter of eat or be eaten. That was what I learned on the streets. When a wallet fell out of someone's pocket right in front of me, I didn't even think twice before snatching it. I became a thief so that my sisters and I could survive. As a teenager, I was invited to join a gang and was stupid enough to accept.
The world of crime has its allure. I saw many of my childhood friends give in to its temptations. They were only seeking better lives, but all they did was waste their futures.
Sounds familiar. Back then, I dreamed of joining a local gang. They seemed to have it all. Fancy clothes, posh food, and luxurious flats. I wanted what they had. But everything comes at a cost. By joining the gang, I lost my family. My mum, she disowned me. I stopped existing to her just like my father did.
Did you ever try to reconnect with her?
I didn't bother. To that heartless woman, I was nothing but a failure. Or, in her own words, a rotten apple she wanted nowhere near her good daughters. That was pretty high and mighty for someone who used to send her children to beg for money.
Despite your mother's shortcomings, she was still family. It must have been hard being kicked out of your own home.
I wasn't ready to leave the nest, that's for sure. The hardest part was saying farewell to my sisters. It felt like I was losing a part of myself. But at the time, being away from Clemency and Mildred was for the best. I never wanted to be a bad influence on them. I hoped life would get better once I'd grown up. Oh, how naive I used to be. Things only got worse. I had no joy in my adult life, except for my short-lived marriage. Back then, I was even robbed of any peace to grieve for my late husband. The other inmates made sure of that. It was truly my darkest hour.
Did you have anyone to support you during that time?
At the end of my first year in prison, Dad resurfaced in my life. I couldn't believe my eyes when he came to visit me in prison. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how much I'd missed my dad.
I imagine you had a lot to catch up on.
After more than a decade apart, we had a lot to talk about. He told me about his life. Honestly, it was as much of a mess as mine. After prison, he wasn't just shunned by our family, but also by everybody he used to know. Like father, like daughter, I guess.
Was he ever tempted to return to the Warren family?
Not once. Regardless of his hardships, my father remained committed to living a life of integrity. And he wanted me to do the same. His unwavering moral support during my time behind bars kept me from straying. It was thanks to his advice that I was able to get out of that nightmarish place in the end.
I'm sure he was happy for you.
That joy was short-lived, I'm afraid. When he discovered I was being blackmailed into working for his cousin, it shattered him. He had to witness his daughter being dragged into the very life he desperately tried to escape. That took an unbearable toll on him. He suffered a stroke shortly thereafter. I wrote to Clemency and Mildred. I needed support. Someone, anyone to talk to. But I never received a reply from them. At the time, I didn't understand why they'd abandoned me. I only found out much later that the letters had never reached them. My mother had been hiding them from my sisters. For most of her miserable life, that woman clung to the fear that I might somehow corrupt her good daughters. She hadn't changed one bit. Still the same heartless witch who disowned me for joining a gang.
I don't understand why she'd be so unwilling to leave the past behind.
My mother hated me in the same way she hated my father. It was easier for her to blame us for everything that had gone wrong in her miserable life.
What a lamentable attitude. Even if that was true, it doesn't justify her forsaking her own child.
Well, it doesn't matter anymore. She's no longer with us. My mother passed away a couple of months after I was released. It was at her memorial that I saw my sisters again.
Were they happy to see you?
I can't say they both were. Things had changed between us. Clemency was condescending toward me. She'd become heartless, just like our mother. But Mildred and I reconnected. It was thanks to her that I got my first job after prison. Unfortunately, I didn't stay in that job for long, all because of Nigel.
You've been deprived of happiness for too long, Georgiana. I hope you can find some here on Isla Esperanza.
People like me don't deserve to be happy, Mr. Navarro.